Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone to the March 30th, 2015 special meeting of the City of Brentwood Planning and Zoning Commission. If you'll please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Clint Lewis. Here. Rich Obertino.
Here.
John Nerman is here. Sherry Bilderback.
Here.
Michael Daming.
Here.
Jennifer Hansen.
Here.
David Diven.
Here.
David Plefka.
Here.
We have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nuremberger. We have one item on our agenda tonight, and that is the long-awaited comprehensive plan review report that's been prepared by Josiel Levine. And we're going to handle this via presentation by the review report authors. Then we'll open it up to the commissioners, and then we'll take some comments from an audience, which it looks like we have a nice-sized audience here tonight. So thanks for coming out. So Drew, if you want to step forward, introduce yourself, introduce your company, and then go ahead and run us through this report, which I'm sure the commissioners have already been through with the fine-tooth comb.
Sure. Yeah, hopefully so. The hang of the mic here for a second.
No.
Sorry, oh, no problem. I went for the mic and
He's
that was a
sensitive
scary
about
moment. Yeah. It sounds like it's working, and Justin's back, who is going to operate the slide. So, all technology in place. It's hard to see on that slide, but as you said, I'm from Josiel Levine Associates, which is our urban planning, community planning, economic development firm based out of Chicago. As we talked about through the process, I'm actually from St. Louis, so always good to be here. My name is Drew Awesome. I'm a senior associate urban planner with the firm. And as you said, we were hired to conduct an evaluation or assessment of the City of Brentwood's existing comprehensive plan and target areas that seem worth the investment for updates versus other areas of the plan that have essentially held the test of time over the last 9 or 10 years and are still relevant or applicable to the community going forward. So that brief introduction, I'll jump right into brass tacks. All right. So I have a brief presentation for tonight. We'll go through, as you said, we can take questions and answers later on, and also facilitate some discussion, hear some feedback. We can make adjustments and modifications to the report based on you guys' feedback. So I have a basic overview. So for those of you who may have a copy of the report, I'll just do quick little references if you want to follow along, but you don't have to. So page 5, we talk about in the introduction kind of the purpose of the 2 reasons why we're here tonight. One is what's the purpose of a comprehensive plan? Many of you guys obviously on the commission are familiar with that, but it's really the city's playbook or blueprint for the community. It addresses who Brentwood is as a community and where it's going over the next 10, 15, 20 years and what that vision looks like. From there, then it goes into goals, objectives, strategies, actions, projects, and all the things that go into either running the municipality or the public, private, nonprofit, all the different stakeholders in a community. Comp plans can come in a lot of different forms and purposes, but or in different manners, but that's essentially its purpose at the end of the day. So our purpose as a firm working with you guys was, as I said earlier, to look at that report and analyze it. So we went through the document itself, but as you guys know in the scope that we proposed, we wanted to go further than that. So we'll overview, we've done some outreach. We've talked with you all, with city staff, and listened to the community through a number of different mechanisms to get a sense of how you guys view your community and what the issues and goals are today. And as we built that base of information through field work, driving every block, every street, looking at every parcel of the community, running demographic trend analysis, looking at a market analysis here in 2014 into 2015 to get a sense of where the community is today. We then simply calibrated that against the plan and said, you guys on Planning and Zoning Commission, folks on the Board of Aldermen, folks in the community that are trying to make investment decisions or navigate the things that are being proposed and placed in front of them. Does the document give you that fair certainty or that guidance making those decisions based on what we've seen, heard, and researched through data today? So those are the 2 purposes for tonight. So comprehensive planning, yeah. One thing, if you want to jump back one slide, is That was a point we've heard a few different times. We don't discuss directly in the report, but there's, no hard and fast rule on best practices for planning, but a general rule of thumb is a lot of times traditional comprehensive plans are about a 20-year window. About every 10 years, they're more formally updated. Every 5 years, sort of kick the tires, do a more intensive review, oftentimes sort of led by the commission. And then there's usually internal operations, annual reporting on progress that's been made on action items or projects. So that's always kind of the background we have when we come in and look at a plan and see if it's still doing what community leaders need today. And then, as we said, we're looking at it in the plan review report at the timeline, essentially 2006 to 2015. So one brief thing wanted to cover, and it's outlined in detail in the report, is we wanted to establish some methodology and evaluation criteria. So like I discussed, basically we asked a series of questions and looked at where's the community at today, and then can you still find the policy guidance in the document itself? Does the 2006 plan adequately address everything? Are there new issues? Were issues that were identified in 2006 not really issues anymore? Were there projects that were completed? Or has there been more nuanced or subtle twists to the issues where the plan still speaks to a lot of it, but there's a little bit of an update? And as a sneak preview, that's generally some of the areas we found was things weren't terribly far off, but some targeted updates of some of the things the plan does address would probably be beneficial. So first area we'll talk through is outreach. As I said, we invested a fair amount of energy in conducting a number of workshops. We had a community workshop and a business workshop. We met with you folks on Planning and Zoning Commission, and we also met with City Hall directors, sit a part of that research to get a sense of what's on the ground. We also conducted a number of online outreach activities. We had questionnaires or surveys that residents and business owners could take that were customized to each perspective. We received a number of emails via the website where folks just shared their thoughts, essentially in email or letter format. We also used a software called the Social Mapping Application, or SMAP. Next slide. This is an example of the project website that housed that online outreach and status updates. And then the next slide. It's just a crude screen capture of SMAP, and you can see some of the points that people from the public mapped. So we went through, looked at the aggregated results of that, the comments that they made, and collected all of that outreach. Through all of that, along with, as I said, doing a lot of field work, driving the community over the course of a number of days, pulling some of the existing maps. This won't show up real well on this slide, but that is a page in the report itself. We decided to create a key issues map. Some of those points are generic. They don't really point to a parcel on the ground. You'll see the map is sort of a sketchy map, but it identifies some of the key issues we heard through all of this outreach. As we said, we took the approach of, if we were doing this plan, what are we hearing and what are we seeing about the community before we really dove into the plan to see how it would address it or give that guidance. And so wanted to review some of those tonight. So one of the ones we heard was flooding, closely related with stormwater management. That was an issue that was keen to a lot of folks, particularly obviously near the creeks and then in the Manchester Road corridor. Transportation, not only flow and congestion and some difficult intersections, but just the condition of the roadways themselves, the design of the roadways, curb to curb. There was a lot of different Metrolink and transit opportunities in the community. There was a lot of discussion about different facets of transportation in virtually all parts of the community. Flooding and stormwater. Public safety, there was discussions on a number of different points, impacts on the community related to new transit that has come in the last 10 years, the location of the police department, and if that was the most optimal location, the age of the police facilities. There was a lot of comments about the police and fire, some of the community's big strengths, and they want to make sure that those investments are there to keep them that way. Then there was a lot of discussion about managing growth. That was probably one of the central points of conversation, both residential and commercial. So there's the intersection between, this is a very mixed-use community. There's a lot of activity. There's a lot of different uses going on. So how do residential and commercial relate to each other? But then the visions for those two uses within themselves. So the big one was regional retail. There was different points of view. Certainly folks recognize the benefits of the sales tax and that was paid by the regional retail, that was a big thing, that if you know anything about Brentwood, as you come into the St. Louis area, you're going to know some of those key destination retailers. And there's folks that felt like that was positive. Some folks wanted to see that expand. Other folks felt like it was about right-sized and the attention needed to go to other parts of the community. But obviously that's a major part of the community. It was addressed in the 06 plan and it still is important today. And then residential quality of life, anywhere from tear downs to encroachment of commercial onto residential neighborhoods, to the need for reinvestment in infrastructure in some of the existing neighborhoods, to enhancements like expanding the trail network or adding more sidewalks or lighting into the residential areas to make sure that there's reinvestment, new families move in, that the property values stay stable and increasing. So those are two of the main areas. Related to that was managing residential character, as I said, gets into the tear down issue, but also even just as people do additions or make adjustments to the building materials, or just as they maintain the homes that are in Brentwood, what role is there for the city in managing that residential character? That came up in a number of the different outreach activities. Another big one were the two corridors, Manchester and Brentwood. Almost anything you can possibly think of about those corridors, from them as transportation roadways, both for motorists and improving that experience, but for bicyclists and pedestrians, the condition of them, the streetscaping, the lighting, but into them as a business district, how they relate and connect to the adjacent residential areas, the importance of the corridors in shaping Brentwood's community identity within the region. It's no surprise to you guys, but the corridors were probably one of two, the two corridors combined, one of the two major topics of conversation throughout all the outreach. Kind of touched on this some, but community facilities, this facility, City Hall, the police station, and general parks and rec facilities were a point of conversation, maybe not as much as the residential, commercial, and the corridors themselves, but folks feel like there's pretty solid community facilities here. They want to make sure that that's planned for and invested in over time, and the connection to the residential quality of life is obvious. Also the changing demographics, folks felt that there's aging in place and senior populations that are emerging in the community, and a lot of people have enjoyed raising their families and living in Brentwood, and they want to stay here, but they feel like that's a policy area that needs to be addressed in a variety of ways. But then also younger families, there was comments about that younger families will move in, but it's sort of when they need, if I remember, they need that third bedroom, that there's a trigger there. So how do you attract young professionals and young families from a home ownership standpoint, but then how do you keep them in Brentwood? And addressing those two specific demographic populations was a point of conversation. Families and young professionals, and aging in place programs and seniors. Also, there was a lot of discussion about Brentwood is unique from its neighbors, Maplewood, Webster Groves, Clayton, of not having that traditional downtown historic core. That Brentwood has a good reputation within the St. Louis region. It has a strong community identity, positive associations from it, but it doesn't have that downtown area, or it doesn't necessarily have the gathering place sort of identity or brand that other communities in this part of St. Louis have. Although it's known as a pretty strong residential community, that's an area people are desirous of being addressed going forward. Also, there was a little bit of conversation about strengthening relationships between the public and City Hall, between different actors within the city and with the county, just that there's opportunities as some of these issues would be identified and go forward, that communication could be strengthened and collaboration and coordinating efforts could be strengthened going forward. Repositioning the industrial districts was probably just behind Manchester and Brentwood, certainly within the commercial industrial piece. There was some interest in the industrial areas along Deer Creek, but it was primarily Strassner and Hanley Industrial Court. Those areas had served well over time, but we heard discussion about that there's athletic facilities, daycare facilities, some things that aren't the traditional industrial uses seen in there over time, and concern about the long-term viability of those areas, but also saw ripe potential for those to be repurposed close to some major regional employment hubs. Obviously Clayton, the Central West End, Washington University, and that was an area we'll talk about some later, but is maybe one of the biggest shifts from the 2006 plan. And you always get parks, open space, recreation, and trails, always fun, everybody likes them, so we got a fair amount of comments about that, more investment in the parks, more trails, more open space and the critical piece to that. The key issue with that was looking for open space and parks west of Brentwood Boulevard, particularly in the northwest part of the community where the perception is that that's lacking. One thing we also like to do is we make sure to point out the strengths and assets of the community. A lot of times planning activities will focus on a big project or who you want to be as a community, or something that's trying to be achieved, and a lot of times you miss opportunities that are sitting on the table, or you fail to sort of recognize some of the great things that are going on in the community. So anywhere from the community's location to its affordability to its small town charm to its access to jobs, a number of those, dozens of those are listed in the plan in detail. I wanted to make sure to hit that in the presentation, but we heard a number of strengths and assets, and people feel very strongly and very positively about the community. So the next section, maybe more dry to folks not on the Planning and Zoning Commission, but we took a hard look at your existing planning and zoning codes, your development regulations. So first we looked at plans. Chapter 3 in the report on page 21, we go through and we review some of the most critical plans, maybe not a completely exhaustive list, but we looked at your existing parks master planning, which is obviously very important and relates directly to the comprehensive plan. But we looked at some of the regional planning efforts that have been underway, either at East West Gateway or at St. Louis County since then. There's been a number of different exploratory studies and Deer Creek Parkway and some things that would impact you guys. We took a look at those just to get a general sense of how that would impact. And the implications are, in an established suburban area, there hasn't been a whole lot of big moves. It's not like something that was a cornfield 10 years ago is now 5,000 residents. So it's a pretty predictable environment, but there are some major regional efforts and things that if you would go forward and do a comprehensive plan update, you would want to get more into the detail of those plans, see what makes sense for Brentwood, and use those as a guide as much as you possibly can. Then took a look at your zoning. On page 24, we just used your existing zoning map, and we go through each of the commercial district, or each of the different zoning districts. We looked at residential zoning, which was pretty straightforward. There's a few findings in there. One thing to note is we always say planning's not zoning, zoning's not planning, but obviously they work hand in hand. In a comprehensive plan update, you would want to have an understanding of how your goals and objectives would be influencing potential zoning policy forward. The residential zoning didn't seem like it was far off. It seems like it would continue to be effective for the community, but the tear down issue is one that can be handled through different policies, and that's probably the main residential zoning or development regulation that you would need to look at. The commercial districts, you have general commercial and local commercial. Those again look like they're pretty solid tools, but maybe need some updating and look at the application of where those are being used within the community. One thing we highlight as you go into the industrial districts, that was one area where having a clear vision for the city's industrial areas would probably lend better guidance to how to draft those zoning codes and how to apply them on the map. One thing we thought was interesting was the Manchester Road corridor, the north side zone general commercial and the south side zone industrial, which is not a bad thing and it reflects what's on the ground today, but as there's a clear vision for what you want Manchester Road to be and what it can be, you probably are going to need to adjust those zoning tools, whether that's through overlays or different regulatory tools, or better applying the commercial or local commercial zoning district. We always like to use what you guys have on the books if it's an effective tool. In general, the zoning was, but it might be whether it's perfectly calibrated to what the vision for some of these areas are. And as I said, in the industrial piece, that's really where you saw it in the Strassner and Hanley Industrial Corridor area. If you see on the zoning map, which you folks can see on the wall, the area is kind of covered by a few different zoning districts, which again makes sense for what's on the ground, but for some of those older industrial properties, as those sort of convert, if you're trying to incentivize redevelopment or additional density or office development, those are things that in a comprehensive plan update we could get further into the weeds to get a sense of whether the goals and vision for those areas are going to be hindered or encouraged by the zoning codes. So we went through, and there's more technical detail and interesting detail in there. We looked at the planned development district and special district zonings too. Again, those are pretty progressive tools. Those are best practices. There's communities that aren't using those yet, and those are typical recommendations as part of a comprehensive plan. The one area was looking at the Brentwood Boulevard corridor. That is probably going to have to be some sort of planned district zoning. You're going to want to have some creative tools in place. For this scope of this project, we just didn't go further enough to say we have a clear understanding of what the vision is for Brentwood Boulevard, and then really kick the tires on the zoning to know that that's going to match it. It's in the right general direction, but if you would do a plan update, that's an area where you're really going to want to get into detail and understand how the planned district zoning, again, either hinders or encourages what you're looking to achieve. Good, on slide, yep. I thought I had to talk through all of that off of one slide, I was right. So then chapter 4 on page 29 is a demographic and market analysis. Again, this is a chapter to get to questions and conversation. Won't beat you with the detail, but there's a lot of detail in this. So we went through and looked both at demographic trends. Again, it's an established suburban community. You haven't seen 25% population growth. This is one of the healthiest, most competitive parts of the St. Louis region, which in general as a metropolitan area has continued to be a strong, attractive place in the Midwest in the United States. So the population's been pretty stable, and a lot of these demographic statistics or census figures have been pretty stable, which is good. But as you go through and slide, if you look at the population, again, it's been pretty stable. There's been some decline in the past as household size in the country and in the St. Louis region shrank, but in general, it's been pretty stable. And so where you really see interesting demographic shifts in the last 10 years has been in age. As we know, the community's aging. Addressing senior needs and aging in place policies is maybe something more important today than it was 10 or 15 years ago. And then the community's becoming more diverse in a lot of ways. And as you have younger folks come in with different backgrounds, there may be needs for different recreation programming or different ways that services interface with the public. The last one, income has been pretty steady, but there were some projections for it to rise, which is anticipated. Again, this is a competitive residential community within the St. Louis area. It has access to good jobs. So the biggest impact assessment from that is you sort of have a good sense of who the community is as far as size. It's going to have a little bit more disposable income. It's going to age some, and it's going to become a little bit more diverse, but it's not going to have a fundamental shift as far as growing in size or shrinking rapidly or any of those types of issues that you would deal with in other communities. Then we also took a look from a market standpoint at employment. The total employment has been pretty stable. I'm going to start sounding like a broken record, but this is usually pretty typical of established suburban areas, as you don't see a lot of big swings. There is some job growth predicted for the area, and a lot of that comes from being in the mid-St. Louis County market and access to employment areas. And again, that's something that we would want to dig in greater detail in a plan update as you could reposition the two core commercial corridors, but then especially the industrial areas. What sort of market is out there for that type of either office or light industrial product, and how could that drive local job growth as communities, as we said, kind of Clayton in the Central West End area, as you may reach real estate saturation or they get additional difficulty in putting projects together. Employment is an area that we took a look at, and Brentwood is in a pretty good position now, and it's an area that you would look at in more detail with an update. Housing, there's been a number of housing new permits and housing construction over the last 10 to 15 years. A lot of that appears to be related to the tear down issue. There might have been a few parcels that were double lots that were infilled over time, but as an established mature suburban community, you haven't seen a whole lot of that. The business analyst software and market analyst software we use doesn't project a whole lot of new housing construction. So it's going to be more about turning those over to the next generation, seeing that reinvestment additions and things like that. Retail, that was an area that was obviously very interesting. And I think that's one of the fundamental things the community would have to face in a plan update. It's probably no surprise to you guys, the retail market here is really strong. The transportation infrastructure is almost perfectly designed to be an attractive, competitive retail location. Even during the worst parts of the recession where you saw a lot of stores closing, as you guys know, Circuit City or Borders, when it was almost instantaneously in the grand scheme of things that you had high quality tenants trying to get into this market. So there's still consumer demand within the trade area. Brentwood's well positioned for large retail development. So then the issue is, where do you put those things on the map? That's obviously more difficult going forward. And then how does that fit into the community's vision, or exactly where's the sweet spot on what type of development the community would want versus what the market or the physical capacity the community would be able to support. Again, I'm managing the clock here some so we can maybe go through in greater detail, but with the office and industrial markets, kind of touched on them already. Pretty competitive. It hasn't been one of the region's strongest office markets, but its location and access to transportation and transit makes it pretty attractive. So that's something in an update you would look at, is how do you get the office product on the market that could compete for that? Because in general, it's well positioned. Industrial, generally St. Louis County hasn't seen as much industrial distribution facilities, fulfillment facilities as you've seen, and Franklin, Jefferson, particularly St. Charles County and the Metro East, having large footprints, quick access to interstates, those types of things for some of that industrial development. Obviously, Brentwood's not had a history of heavy manufacturing, and this wouldn't be a community that they would look at for that. So there's some opportunities for industrial, but by and large, it's reflective of being in the established St. Louis County core. So then the last chapter, and then we'll get into our key findings and recommendations. So we went through a number of things to look at the document itself. So as we sort of try to get our arms around all these issues, listen to a lot of folks, look at a lot of numbers, drive around, write down notes on our maps, we tried to take all this, digest it in, and funnel it to, over the next 10 years and beyond, what would folks in your positions on the Board of Aldermen, or just folks navigating decisions in the community, what are the types of things they should anticipate? What would those decisions look like? And does the document give the guidance that it would need? So from the first standpoint, we looked at the document itself as a planning product and a tool, a reference tool for you guys to use. And there's a few things that we felt like were reflective of plans that were done 10 or 15 years ago. The evaluation of good, bad, or ugly, it's not necessarily as relevant as to just where are we today and what tools are out there that could benefit you guys. So there's a few things that are fairly reflective of work during the time when this was prepared. Go through a couple highlights which are detailed in the plan. So there's something in our office we always get kind of smacked with the ruler if we start to devolve into this sort of planner gobbledygook type of stuff. It's generally kind of planner's voice. It can be too technical, or it's things that don't mean anything to the general public. And there's spots at times where there's key issues within the report that it would probably have been benefited from using more generalized language for public consumption. One of the things we talk about in the report is, the nature of these plans have changed. 10, 15 years ago, it wasn't uncommon that plans like these were written and really for the Planning and Zoning Commission and for folks on city staff. Now they're PDFs on websites, they're sent around social media, they're used by nonprofits, charity groups, neighborhood associations. So again, I don't know that that's an indictment as much as it's a reflection of how much our culture's changed and how planning as a profession has changed. And so that's one of the key pieces, and that bit of analysis touches on some of the next few ones too. So sometimes it uses vague language. It may mean some of the terms when they say, moderately priced housing, or they used moderately a lot, moderate income. That may mean something like ballpark to planners or real estate developers or folks. But again, if you're somebody who doesn't have that training and you're in the community and there's not a definition section or there's not clear language, it just makes it more difficult to use as a reference or a tool. Sort of related, there's a few sections where it talks about technical things and it gets a little jargony, which again just sort of puts up a little bit of a buffer from being used as a public document. And then one area that we hit on, and we outlined an example where relevant information about residential development and residential housing types is included on 5, 6, 7 different pages. It makes sense. I kind of talk about it's a lot like the yellow pages, where it's like 6 or half dozen, and what part do you, I don't know, people still use the yellow pages as data reference, I guess. But there was times as a document I have the copy here. I mean, it's, again, reflective of plans done at the time. It's a large document. It was written as a printed document where some plans are written to be sort of ever evolving, hosted on websites, used for more of a digital electronic searching function. So again, this is just reflective of where planning was at that period of time. So there's at times a lack of cross-referencing, sort of creative use of sidebars or notes where you may read about flooding and then say, hey, Parks and Rec and open space is a critical part of stormwater management. Some of the things that you see in documents now weren't as common back then, and the plan lacks some of those things that makes it quickly and easily referenceable to help you guys in your decision making and folks on staff or people in the community to know they found everything relevant to the policy area that they're looking for. So one of the things we looked at, all the issues we heard from outreach, and then we sort of tried to distill that into the difference between 2006 and 2015. What are some of the main issues that a little extra guidance seems like it would be beneficial? Can run through these fairly quick. One was the schools. There wasn't a lot in the past plan about coordination with the school districts, but that's something that has sort of surged in the last 10 or 15 years. There's a closer relationship between cities, counties, and school districts. Obviously, schools are an important part of where people decide to make residential investment and location decisions, particularly as homeowners. There's a lot of interest in the schools in the community. People are proud of the local schools and they want to make sure they continue to be competitive and high quality. So there's some programs and recommendations you could look at with that. The commercial redevelopment piece, obviously retail and other commercial development, office has changed in the wake of the recession. That's an area that's still ripe that would be addressed going forward. The tear down issue, that was discussed in a lot of detail and addressed pretty squarely in the prior plan. It appears to have slowed down some around the foreclosure crisis and the recession, which is not unexpected. But driving around, I mean, it's obvious that it's still here. By all accounts, I think it's a forecast for the community that you should anticipate it going forward. And that's probably an area that the 06 plan would need to be updated to give you some better tools on how to address that issue. Flooding still is an issue. A lot's been done to work on it, but flooding's a tough one. We say, water's gonna try and go where it wants to go, and we all try and do our best with it, but that's an area that came up a lot as a continued issue where solutions have been elusive. The community identity piece, which we talked about some, the 2006 report talked about it a little bit, but there's been a lot of trial and error and a lot of best practices developed over the last 10 or 15 years on how to effectively do this, whether it's branding your community or just building sort of a community spirit. That's an area that could be built on. The town center, the concept that was proposed perhaps made sense at the period of time that it was written. It was probably it probably would be more challenging going forward to develop some of that. But the need for a town center or a downtown district or a central gathering space is one of the key and most frequently heard things that we heard through the outreach process. So that's something that still needs to be identified and done. Maybe it's not on the same spot going forward. Maybe it looks a little bit different, but that function for the Brentwood as a community still needs to be addressed. And one of the big areas which we wrote a couple pages on is the implementation toolbox. We're critical of ourselves and we're critical of the profession at times that, nowadays with precious public dollars and just the amount of priorities that are out there, you have to have a rigorous implementation toolbox of the strategies, of the action, producing results, whatever you want to call it. You got to get the job done. And that's something I think that has evolved through the profession and I know is evolved with us in the firm is the need for public-private partnerships, the need for community collaboration, bringing nonprofits, neighborhood groups, figuring out this is the issue we need to address. Here's 5 things we can do about it, but just not the city or just not government is going to do that. Who are the folks that we can have as stakeholders at the table? Then how do you carve up that work over a timeline, and then where does the money come from? That's an area I think planning's invested a lot of energy in recent years, particularly since the recession. And the plan, 10 years later, the implementation is going to be a little stale, and any plan written by anybody. And that's one of the reasons you look at it, but I think it's an area that with an update, you would get a lot more energy or you'd get more substantive recommendations and clear direction on who needs to implement what, by when, and with what money and resources. And that's also reflective of where planning is today. So get through this, thank you for bearing with. So I had a few key findings that gets into our recommendations. One is the vision and goals. They're probably in the same ballpark. You know, like I sort of referenced a few times during the presentation, Brentwood is an established, mature suburban community. That's not gonna fundamentally change. You sort of have a good handle on who you are as a community, how Brentwood got to where it is today, its history, and people have a pretty clear understanding of what they like about the community and the areas that need to be enhanced or improved. And so as you look at an update, the vision and goals, there's some things you could update, modernize, but the community as a whole, the essence of Brentwood hasn't fundamentally changed in the last 10 years necessarily. But there's been shifting conditions. So when you start to get into, well, that flooding is an issue, how do we address that? There's been changes, I said flooding, maybe specific to this issue, but federal or state programs, as I said, the relationship of implementation, finding more collaborative partnerships, obviously with demographic trends, market impacts, there's just been things that are gonna naturally shift. And the last 10 years has been a busy period in American history, basically. So when you get down to the nuance, maybe the goals and visions are in the ballpark, but when you get into the nuance of, well, what did we do about these things, or what does this look like when you put it on a trend line forward, that's really where the subtlety lies, and where some bolstered recommendations might be helpful in you guys' positions as decision makers. The other one too is development competition. You guys know, particularly for retail development, but commercial development in general has got more competitive over the last 10 years. It's harder to put projects together. The financing's more difficult. Those are things you would probably look at in an update. Pursuing grants, that's one thing. We never make guarantees. Just because you do a comprehensive plan update or a shiny new comprehensive plan doesn't mean the trucks of money are going to start backing up. So we never promise that. But what we have seen with communities we've worked with is when you can show that a grant project, whether it's nonprofit, a big national foundation, state, or federal government, has a program, and you weren't just in City Hall and said, oh, here's a grant, we should put something together for it. When you can demonstrate, we did this large public outreach process, we've put together a comprehensive plan. Your goals for your grant project fit exactly with our strategic goals for who we are as a community and where we're going. That has benefited a lot of communities in showing that the use of those, again, those precious public dollars going forward is more strategic. So that's, again, kind of similar to the private side and the development side. You sort of have to heighten and be more articulate about how the project fits in with what you're trying to do as a community. We've seen that on the public side and nonprofit side with grant funding. I won't beat this to death, but key finding was the implementation piece was reflective of the time and could be bolstered. And one of the things, and jump into the last piece, is recommendations, but excuse me, is the sub-area plans. That's one thing that wasn't really part of the past comprehensive plan. For our firm, for what it's worth, that's an area we usually emphasize and talk about when we come into a community. A lot of times it's where you can take these high-level policies and you say, well, we should improve pedestrian connectivity and the pedestrian environment to encourage walkability. And that starts to get into sort of planner speak like I was talking about. So what does that mean? Well, sub-area plans are a way to look at Manchester or Brentwood and say that sort of policy or that vision or that planning best practice, that's what this specifically looks like on the ground. So you say at the corner in First and Main, you need to put in ADA accessible ramps, you need to put in push buttons, you need to do this and that. That wasn't necessarily as common 10 or 15 years ago, and now I think it's something that cities and counties are seeing added value and higher return on investment when they do comprehensive planning, is to just knock out some of that detailed sub-area planning at the same time. So recommendations, we came in, we wanted to make sure we took an authentic or genuine look at it. We wanted to come in and give you guys useful information. The comp plan is supposed to help you guys make decisions, so we wanted to make sure the evaluation of the thing that helps you make decisions helps you guys evaluate it as a tool. I think our main recommendation is there would be some benefit to updating your comprehensive plan. It's been 10 years. There's some key areas that will probably help you guys, and you're probably going to see certain shifts in the economy or certain shifts in the community where that's going to come across your desk as plan proposals or just issues that you're gonna start to hear from residents or business owners. And there's some areas where updating your plan would maybe make your job more informed and get out in front of some of those issues to be more proactive than reactive. So run through a couple of quick recommendations. We would say maximize your return on investment. You guys have some solid planning. There's been some good regional planning. There's been some studies on Hanley. There's been some flooding and waterway storm mitigation issues on Deer Creek. There's a lot of planning that's out there that at least glances at Brentwood. You want to make sure to maximize your return, take all that's been done, and make sure you focus on what hasn't been addressed as thoroughly as you'd like it. Related, leverage your resources. You've been doing park master planning, you've been doing some other things in-house. The staff's been getting out in front of sustainability issues and some other things. Roll all that up as much as you can. Comprehensive plan is comprehensive, just like it says. So as much as there's been more focused efforts, leverage all those existing resources and make sure as much of your public dollars that we put towards a plan update go towards the things that are either most needed from a pressing issue standpoint or would give you the most guidance going forward on things that are future items. One would be the sub-area plans as discussed, Brentwood, Manchester, some of the industrial areas. Tear downs have been addressed, but it appears to be an issue that still needs to be addressed, how it fits best in the community, and what are going to be the most effective tools for the city to address them. That's an area you would get into more detail in an update. The commercial districts, all of them, not only understanding how you maintain the regional retail that you've built so it continues to be a community asset, but obviously Brentwood and Manchester and some of the other commercial industrial areas. The community identity piece, I've discussed that a lot, but that's something that probably needs to be more robustly addressed in an update. And related to the flooding and stormwater management piece, could look at as you do some of these improvements, whether that's putting in new trails, adding new parks, doing road work on Manchester or Brentwood. That's an area that could be further explored. Obviously in the last 10 years, a lot of work has been done on green infrastructure, sustainability, and stormwater management. There's a lot of new best practices out there. They matter less or more to different communities, but you guys have a number of creeks. You have Deer Creek, which is a major creek. You have some documented flood issues, 100-year floodplain issues. That might be part of a solution that the city could be play a leadership role in. The economic development piece, obviously Eager Road has done a lot of things through the private economy side, but Manchester and Brentwood, that's an area where you'd have to look at city, county economic development programming, have an understanding of who needs to lead what role there is for government incentives or parcel assembly, or pretty big conversations that would have to be a part of the update is what's the community's temperature or appetite for some of those approaches from an economic development standpoint, if that's what's needed to achieve some of the vision or goals we've heard for some of those corridors. And I think lastly, the zoning and development code piece, like I said, planning's not zoning, zoning's not planning. You should always lead a zoning effort through a good rigorous planning exercise, but based on preliminary sort of first blush reactions of some of the things we've heard, some of the things we've seen, our initial review of the zoning codes, you probably wouldn't do a complete zoning code or regulatory environment overhaul, but there's probably tactical or surgical pieces that would be updated and better calibrated. You could do that as part of the comprehensive plan update in sort of a 1-2 domino fashion, which has gotten more popular or common as a best practice with communities, or you could complete the plan, sort of take a deep breath, and then take a look at your zoning in a separate effort. That's still effective, and a lot of communities do it that way. So with that, I just wanted to say thank you. I know I mentioned at some of the meetings, grew up here, came over to these stores, had my daughter bought some diapers and things at Target, so work in different communities. It's cool when you come into a place and you already know it pretty well. So as a personal note, I've enjoyed it, and the firm appreciates the opportunity to present this tonight. With that, got one more slide that says questions, which you guys know is coming. So.
All right. Good deal. Thank you, Mr. Awesome. So at the outset of this project, other than doing nothing, we were faced with two options, whether to develop an entirely new plan or concentrate on an update to the existing plan. And it may just be semantics, but I don't think they are, because you've referred to them distinctly through your presentation. What is your recommendation for us? Do we need, and maybe what is the difference between the two, an update or a full new plan, and then what's your recommendation for us?
Sure. There's different approach. If you say just forget everything, we want to do a completely new comprehensive plan, some folks may come in and have that completely fresh look, but I mean, you have to have an understanding of how the community developed and how it got here today. Certainly, there's going to be key decisions like Strassner Drive that was discussed specifically in the last plan, and the extension of that was a result of the plan. You can't really come in and do honest planning without having an understanding of the past plans and things like that. So even if you do an all new one, it's still in the context of what's happened. You maybe just push it a little bit further. I always think backgrounds in municipal finance of like zero-based budgeting, where it's like you just strip it all the way back to the studs and then sort of build it back up. You're probably still going to have a police chief, but you still go through the exercise of, well, why do we have a police department? What's it achieving? So if you do a complete new plan from scratch, you're going to sort of say, well, who is Brentwood? Where is it going? Sometimes that's sort of like business world calls it blue sky sort of thinking, just a complete fresh start. You learn things about yourself, you learn things about your strategy or your vision that you wouldn't have if you come in and you're just making adjustments. And there's some benefit to that, but on the flip side, that's probably going to cost you more resources because you're ultimately going to be doing more work. If that's the direction the community wants to go, we never come in and tell anybody this is exactly how you need to run your community or make your decisions. If the goal is you guys feel like your decision making would be improved or more informed or more predictable, if the comprehensive plan, which is a critical document, better address some of the issues you guys are facing, that's the crux of our recommendation. Is you don't need to necessarily start from scratch, because you could go through that process, and some people strategically like that process and feel like it's validation, it's verification, it's affirmation. But our prediction is that if you went through that process based on the outreach we did, you'd probably end up pretty close to the ballpark of some of the goals and vision that was outlined in the 2006 plan. So then I think it's that next level down of some of these very site-specific or tactical or really specific city tools like zoning or development incentives or some of those things that wasn't as fleshed out in the implementation section.
Well,
So
what's the industry standard, though, in terms of a city of our size and demographics? What would be the industry standard? Developing a whole, how often are new plans developed as opposed
Sure.
to updates?
Like talked about on the one slide, if you're integrating your comprehensive plan and any sort of strategic planning into operations, probably doing some level of internal annual reporting. So if there's big red flags pop up, that should be caught in your annual reporting. So the asterisk on all of this is if things sort of steady as you go, things are going according to plan, that's a different context versus there's been a major shift. So the two examples we use is if you're sort of a company town, like 30% of the families or the community somehow related to this, and then all of a sudden that company announces 20% layoffs and they're moving to a different community, that's one of those red flags. The recession impacted a lot of communities, many of them in more severe ways than it impacted Brentwood. So that's when you sort of get into that 1 year, 5 years. Does this plan still make sense? Has there been fundamental shifts in the community that we need to adjust our planning for? You guys obviously got beyond that. Then you get into that 10 to 20 years. So like I talked about on that slide, 10 years, sort of a good rule of thumb or ballpark of communities do exactly what you guys just did. So that's already a best practice is about 10 years, you take a look at it. Does our plan still make sense? And some communities, for different reasons, say we want to start from scratch, and some communities say a lot of this is still purposeful, and we'll build from there. And it's one of those classic it depends, which I hate those answers, but it does depend on the community, and I think that's our recommendation is if you guys want to start from scratch, we would defer to the community, but we don't necessarily think you quote unquote have to.
So, Mr. Wise, one of the more compelling points that I learned from Mr. Awesome was that the availability of grants, we may be hampered in obtaining grants as a result of our outdated plan. So the question for you is, have we been hampered in those efforts to date? And are there any specific guidelines with some of the state or local grants that you've come across that we need to make sure are contemplated and taken into account with this new update?
I think we've been very successful, particularly with some of our transportation federally funded projects in town. We've had several of those over the past several years. So I don't necessarily think that we've been hampered by that, but I think the point is that through the planning process, you may find additional opportunities that you may not have known were out there that would fit the needs of the community.
Okay. All right, let's open it up to commissioners. Questions for Mr. Awesome or just points? Yes, Ms. Bilderbeck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was actually on the Planning Commission when the last comprehensive plan was done. And to be just bluntly honest, I never really liked it. I think that there are some real issues with it. I felt like it was never practical in effect. I felt that, a lot of times you can, and blue sky thinking is fabulous, but you end up with something that has conflicts within it, essentially, because you have something where it says, oh, we want to have this, and it says we want to have this, but the outcome of that is that they conflict and negate each other. So I saw a lot of that in the original comprehensive plan, and at the time, it was rather rushed through the Planning Commission process. So I felt like even though I read it in detail, that we did not have any debate or discussion that is our role under the state statutes at the Planning Commission level. I am absolutely thrilled and appreciative that the Board of Aldermen has seen fit to fund this effort. I think it's very wise. And as much as I say that there were issues in the existing comprehensive plan, and several of which you've pointed out in your report, you don't always have to throw the entire baby out with the bathwater, but you can take pieces of it that work and then blue sky to add on to it, and then do something and fix the problems that are in it and take out what doesn't make sense anymore. And, so it's almost like a hybrid of the two things.
Sure.
Like I wouldn't want to sit down and go through the existing comprehensive plan and just mark it up. Like I don't think that would go far enough. I think a blending of that would work. A couple of the things that I noticed even within this report, which you guys obviously did a great job with, and there's wonderful community input, which I so appreciate having access to. I notice even within here that there's a lot of things that conflict with each other already as far as expressed desires of the community, and I think it's going to take a lot of work to try to figure out, as a planning commission, to try to figure out how to best address those issues. And I think it's imperative that we have professional help in order to be able to do that. Some of the things I've noticed that kind of conflict with each other as far as all worthy goals is, we want to have the children coming in to support the school district is one of the things. And we see the school district and the schools as being beneficial to property values and the future of the community and all of that, which is natural in real estate. So a worthy goal, but then we have the issue and the concerns with tear downs, and the tear downs are actually what brings the families to have more bedrooms in it. I also see some potential issues with some of the other things that kind of tie into that may not work as intended. So I think it's incumbent upon us to take a thorough amount of time in a relatively detailed process in order to figure out how to make those things happen, how to make it feasible, how to make it realistic, so that we don't end up with a plan like we had 10 years ago, where we're here today and we have a planner come in who says to us, with all of their expertise, gee, you just really didn't give anyone any idea of how to go about this. So I really appreciate that. A couple of the big things that we ran into last time, and I see these as still being catch points, and I don't have, sitting here today, any great answer or crystal ball. That's what this process is for, with a lot of smart people and great community input. But one of the things that we ran into last time was a lot of pressure to preserve residential neighborhoods, i.e. backing up to existing commercial properties. So when we looked along the Brentwood corridor, when we get into any word of using development incentives or land assemblage, we had a lot of strong opposition from the public. That's going to be something that is still an issue that I anticipate will be out there based on what we've been seeing over, the Planning Commission over the last however many years. Another thing, of course, is, and perhaps you've addressed it in your report, and I'm just not remembering right now, but two issues relative to Manchester, in addition to the flooding issues, The other issues that we have is we've had lots of developers who have told us over the years that they have no interest in Manchester, and part of it has to do with traffic counts. Part of it has to do with the perception of the area. So, you know, the chicken or the egg, which comes first. So we've tried, like over the years, to look at that in more detail. I know a long time ago, we had and it still exists, but a Brentwood Redevelopment Commission. But essentially, it's not really done much of anything because of the disinterest of the community related to developer incentives and parcel assemblage. But we tried to look at some of those areas and really ran into issues with how are we going to attract the kind of things that we want there. So, so those are some of the things, just like a really high view that I kind of see going forward as issues. And the other thing is I would much rather do the plan first and then do the zoning after that. And I really don't want to take on both at the same time. I think that's just too much. I think that we'll miss something important. So that's my 2 cents at this point, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Nuremberger?
My question or comment was to do with the searchability or being able to read a document really easily and that sort of thing. One thing you made the printing too small in the document you sent us.
Yeah.
We're all blind. Or me, I'm blind.
That's fair.
But versus having just a update or a full plan, would both of them serve the purpose? Would you get a searchability function, be able to look at it easier and that sort of thing? Yeah, I guess I'm asking you. Yeah, either
I
way.
would- Yeah, I would think so. I mean, it's based on, you know, the approach and who you work with, but I think that's become an industry standard. There's some communities that say we're still a paper community, we want the classic book, we want it to, but if you want.
We're past that. We're trying to make everything that people can read and look at and be able to ascertain what part of the plan go to what funding or whatever the thing they want to research and that sort of thing. So I think that would be really important, that be part of it, so.
Yeah, I would anticipate you would get that as part of any planning effort in it, and the best practice is roll it into implementation. So if you're a resident, you showed up to a few meetings, you have a couple issues you're interested in, new playgrounds in the park, or trail expansion, or businesses, then cities have effectively integrated that in their newsletters, their social media, their online presence, they keep project websites alive, so you can track where the plan goes once it's adopted, and it actually becomes projects in your neighborhood and implementation for years after that. And I think that's a fundamental shift.
Yeah, and also there was one meeting when there was a lady that worked for Trail that lives in the city of Brentwood, and she was really adamant that they have a lot of things in place that has to do with bike riding and accessibility and that sort of thing. So that was a good point to be able to address or whatever. Thank you very much.
Okay. Mr. Plufka?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To build on John's point just for a second, would your company be able to take the existing plan and make those technical changes so that it's adaptable, that it's more usable in the way that you described, not just the ring-bound folder, but also something that could be put on a website, it could be manipulated and used? And you were critical in this summary of some of the ways in which the information was presented in the old plan. Is that something you guys could do without having to reinvent or do this all over again from scratch? You could adapt what's already there and make it put it in a more usable form?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
personally, I feel comfortable with that, yeah.
All right, and so, and would the sub-area analysis require a full-blown new plan, or could that be done just as part of an update?
Yeah, it can be done as part of an update. The asterisk would be if it gets to where it conflicts, and then that can get you into different issues as it applies to zoning or people actually proposing development later on.
Well, that's really what my question was going to be about. I heard you say a number of times in your presentation, which was great, by the way.
Thank you.
You talked about stability, you talked about unchanged, you talked about common vision, you talked about continued sense. Mostly, it sounded like you talked about we still live in a community that's largely recognizable to that community in 2006. with very little changes in terms of, as I said, demographics and even population or employment and things like that. And in addition, on some of the key points and issues, I saw the way you described them as being things that were in the 2006 plan were being reiterated again in your sort of informal process of interviewing people for this summary. Is that pretty fair to say?
Yeah, I'd say that's correct.
So did you notice any real shift changes, like there was an effort or there was some feeling about we don't want to move in this direction 10 years ago, and now you're interviewing people and they're saying, no, we really want to move in that direction. You're not seeing much of that, are you?
Like 180 sort of
Exactly.
changes. I don't know that extreme. I would say maybe the two areas that, if you're interested, were the big ones is, and again, we just sort of came in an initial preliminary, so I'll hedge with that, but is with the regional retail. It seems like there's some folks that, 10 or 15 years ago, that was really critical. It's done a lot of positive things for the community from a financial standpoint. And I don't know that anybody that we interacted with expressed that they don't want those areas to continue to do well because they have a benefit. But what that looks like going forward, how much that expands, that's one of those fuzzy areas where we haven't gone further enough to resolve some of those inconsistencies. And then the other one is the interest in walkabilities and trails. And that's less to do with Brentwood and more to do with the United States, that there's been a cultural shift in the last 10 years that almost everywhere we go, people want walkability and bicycle trails. And so we heard that a lot, and you're going to hear that anywhere you go today.
But if I recall in the 2006 plan, there was emphasis, at least some emphasis,
Sure.
on pedestrian-friendly, walkable retail districts.
Sure.
I guess the reason I'm bringing all this up is, rather than, of the two options you described, rather than doing this all over again and the cost involved in something like that and the time, would it make more sense, given the consistency with which our community continues to be, that we progress from that point and perhaps utilize your firm to dig down deeper into some of these sub-areas that may require some more analysis, Manchester, Brentwood Boulevard, and some of the other things you've already discussed. Would that make sense?
Sure, that's pretty much the core of our recommendations is if you want to blue sky it, we're not going to get in the way of it, but you probably end up somewhere pretty close to where you started. But if you focus and concentrate your resources and energy into really getting into those sub areas and corridors, there's towns that have to do a whole new comprehensive plan from scratch, and they do 2 or 3 sub areas. Your sub areas will just be that much more detailed, that much more specific. So when you talk about, and that's probably from the 2006 plan, the pedestrian cycle walkability piece, it explained it fairly clearly as a policy, but it didn't point on the map, here's how you do this. And there has to be a prioritization of that. There's a catalyst, there's sort of a hierarchy. So if you say to make Brentwood Boulevard more walkable to the neighborhoods as a local business district, you could concentrate those resources to say this street is the street you start on. This is the one you do year 1. This is where the sidewalks and street lights and things go in. Year 2 and 3, it goes here. Year 4 and 5, it goes here. That's our approach, and I think that's been a shift in urban planning in the last 10 years. And that's where I'd put your money, to be quite frank.
I was going to say, and so in your opinion, given the constancy that sort of underlies all of this, that it might be money better spent if we start at that point and try to be more specific rather than trying to reinvent ourselves one more time.
Yeah, I think it would help address some of these persistent issues with more guidance and clarity than just going through a traditional start from scratch process.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Hanson?
Thank you for your presentation.
Sure.
My takeaway when I'm reading chapter 5 about the assessment of the 2006 plan is that it's a little bit clunky, based largely on the fact that it was done 10 years ago and the conventions back then were 10 years ago, right? So if we are going to look to update this rather than start fresh, I'm curious to know, in terms of length and organization and usability, what a modern update would entail.
Sure. So you can smack me because I'll say it depends again.
Sure, that's fine.
Then I'll dive in from there. So it's our approach and many firms' approach is they try and create the document or product that is what the community's looking for. So like I said, some folks are like, man, we just love this and this is what we're used to and we want you to kind of create something more similar that's similar. But there's some communities, one we were just working with, that we did sub-area planning and it was, I don't know, 15 pages or something for a few different sub areas, and they said, can you guys just put these on like 11 by 17? You know, we want 11 by 17 format. Can you just do 2 facing pages that show the whole corridor across both of it? And then that could just be easily reprinted on like a wall map on a poster, because we would love to put these in like the lobby of City Hall or in neighborhood, you know, meetings and in that graphical piece. And there was, so one thing you can do that wasn't as common 10 or 15 years ago is 3D visualization. So when you say, we want to do infill development, this is what it's going to look like, instead of just having to talk about it. And it's nobody's fault or your own, but when you start to talk about some of these things, it's hard not to slip into jargon and planner speak, where now you can just pretty quickly and efficiently draw what 5 blocks of Brentwood Boulevard or Manchester Road looks like if your goals and vision are implemented. That's useful to the public. And so there's a lot of folks that they want very short reports, and they don't even really want the report. They want posters, they want images they can put on their website. They want things that the public can actually understand and interact with. And Devin Levine, who's one of the names that's on the firm, he's nationally known. Put in a plug, I guess, for the boss. But yeah, I mean, that's a huge focus. They really push us to innovate on that, and that's an area that we try and do, and there's a number of other firms out there that are doing cool things with that. So it doesn't even have to be a government report anymore if that's not useful for the community.
Thanks, thank you.
Any other questions from commissioners before we open it up to the audience? Mr. Lewis?
Just a couple, thank you, Mr. Damon. A couple of things, on our leveraging our opportunity, did you talk, how many residents and business owners did you speak with in those meetings? And then I know the library is doing something, did we speak to them at all in this process, or is that something we'll go do later?
I can flip it so with the library, we didn't engage their process directly. As part of a comprehensive plan, whether it's an update or whatever type of planning exercise, that's that past plans and that coordination piece that I talked about some. So yeah, going forward, whoever would do that, that's a critical piece, is not just with the library, but with any of your public providers, MSD, the school districts, all that. You want to make sure those plans are calibrated as closely as possible. Then you're quizzing me, see if I put in the numbers.
Just an average is fine?
I think at the public meetings combined, we maybe had about 30 to 40. And I feel like I put in, we had 93 resident questionnaires submitted. And we had, you saw the map has a screen capture in there. So I think we had, I don't know, a few dozen points and comments placed on the map. And the business survey, we didn't get as much response as you would hope for. The ones we did get were quantity. So when we talk about outreach, we always talk about quantity and quality. And you want both, but you really need the quality of comments too. So the folks that did participate, some of them wrote pretty long comments and gave a lot of good detail. But that's not, I think we put that note in here, that's not atypical for a community with a lot of large national businesses. They tend not to participate in these kind of processes unless really directly approached. And so for the amount of outreach we scoped and felt was necessary to do this evaluation, we probably hit that on the head. But going forward, you would probably want to do some more outreach and engage the public and build on this baseline that came out of this report. I don't know if that answers your question.
Mr. Obertino?
One comment, we talked about the grants a little bit, but I want to go down a little bit. So St. Louis and our segmentation that we have, every corner you go across is a different town. There's so many times we don't have much control about what we do because across the street is not us, and Brentwood Boulevard is the disaster that it is. We don't have control. There's comment in there to park on Brentwood Boulevard, get rid of Atlanta traffic, and it doesn't sound like we're going to get less than 5 lanes of traffic when we resurface this summer. Have you had any success with these comprehensive plans and approaching adjacent municipalities or approaching St. Louis County or MoDOT or whoever that may be, and utilizing this as a tool to say, look, we don't just want, this is what our big picture is. Can you use this thing to help us get what we want to do? Because if we don't, and we write this plan that says we want to do whatever we want to do at Brentwood Boulevard, and the over justifying higher up say, well, I don't care what you want to do, this is what we're going to do anyway, it's kind of like a waste of time to go through this thing.
No, I totally agree with that, and, yeah, we always say you gotta get your phone calls returned, you know, and, kind of talking about the implementation piece, I think it ties to that, is, you, oftentimes in a metropolitan area, suburban environment, you don't have control over a lot of key infrastructure pieces or public service providers. The school's the classic one, so critical to where people choose to live, but municipalities, you know, it's not under their jurisdiction, and, so I think that's an area that folks have focused more attention as far as urban planning goes, and it's something we put efforts in. So a couple weeks ago, I just did 60 interviews Monday through Friday, and we went through that. We sat down for an hour with just about any possible stakeholder you could think and understand their 5-year strategic planning, what the long-term vision is, even if it's a nonprofit or some sort of community group. Could they potentially be part of the implementation solution? Could they be at that table? And if they are willing to, what people and trucks and bags of money and all those sorts of resources could they bring? And then how do you start to carve those roles up? That's something we typically recommend at the outset of a process when we scope a comprehensive plan, whether it's an update or a new process, is you have to do that kind of outreach to understand the issues, but it also helps start to build those coalitions as you go through. And so that's other government agencies like MoDOT or the county, but it's anybody that's going to impact the community. And then the other thing I want to mention too is sometimes it helps too, because you guys know that all too keenly in your roles, but a lot of times the public doesn't. And so through the outreach process, sometimes that's a way to help build on that and create public education campaigns. When people, one of the classic ones we always hear is, you know, snow plowing's great except for on Main Street or whatever. And it's like, well, Main Street's the state DOT, the city's not doing it, but that doesn't, not everybody knows that. That doesn't stop them from being frustrated about it. So sometimes we can use it as a public education campaign so that people start to understand that like plate of spaghetti of all the different agencies and how they overlap. And if you can get everybody coordinated, then that's definitely a successful part of a comprehensive planning process.
Mr. Demmett?
Thank you, Mr. Daming. Drew, if I'm reading this correctly, a couple of things that you're suggesting, or the result of some of the suggestions, is that we have a plan that is, number one, we eliminate some of the inconsistencies that are in the current plan, as Sherry talked about, because I know we've had people in front of us who on either side of an issue, and they both have cited to the comprehensive plan in support of their position.
Sure, that's
Which I think tells us that there's a problem there with it. And the other thing is to be more specific. Is that correct in terms of what we should do with certain areas?
Yeah, that's correct. I think that's two great things is there may, you guys know better than I do, there may have been some inconsistency and a lack of clarity in the old plan. We always say you have to provide people fair certainty, whether the homeowner's business or whatever. The plan has to be clear. And then the second thing is that it has to be specific, and those are probably the two areas where you should invest energy.
But I think obviously that can come about when you deal in generalities. They become very subjective, and
Sure.
you're allowed to use them to support your position. What my question is, if we get specific, do we run the risk of turning away some potential development? Trying to come up with a good example here, but let's say we get specific for Brentwood Boulevard and what to do. And so we have this plan laid out, and in the interim, somebody comes in front of us and wants to do just one piece, and it's not part of that specific plan. Do we run the risk then of turning that applicant away because it isn't necessarily fits into that specific plan? Am I making any sense?
Oh, it makes total sense. Yeah, and that's one, I think one of the big conversations you have as you go through this process is kind of quality assurance to make sure that you're not getting too specific or you're not boxing the community in. The one piece I'd say is sometimes folks the whole town is on the same page and they are very clear about what they want on something. Maybe it's like an old warehouse on like the town square, and it's just a really critical piece of property for the community, and everybody knows what they want. They've done the market analysis. They feel strongly that it could be supported, and they're okay with turning people away that come in because they want to hold out and make sure that the vision's realized and they feel confident it can be. But if there's different ways to achieve still sort of the spirit of the general goal of what you want, which maybe it's like we want reinvestment on Brentwood that's small scale and supports the neighborhoods, well, that could come in a lot of different forms. So then you maybe look at some pieces of it specifically, but then other pieces, maybe you leave some flexibility. Through zoning and different things, there's some ways to defer some of that judgment to Planning and Zoning Commission and the Board of Aldermen and city staff and some of your decision makers. So that's like a sliding scale that you get into as you do it, almost to a degree, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, it does, thank you. Thanks,
Very
Bill.
good. So Commissioners, earlier we had talked about hearing this presentation tonight and then taking up what we hear tonight after we've had a chance to contemplate on it at our April meetings, either at our regular meeting or probably more likely at our subcommittee meeting. So with that in mind, is everybody still on the same page in terms of adopting that approach? So we do want to open this up to the audience, but just keeping in mind that no decisions are going to be made tonight. We'd love to have as many of you as possible come to our April subcommittee meeting. The commissioners received this report at the end of last week, have obviously only heard the presentation tonight, so look forward to deliberating on the next step at the April subcommittee meeting. But with that being said, if there are any audience members that would like to address the commission, we'd love to hear from you. So please step forward, introduce yourself, your address, and say your piece.
Maureen Saunders, 2326 Park Ridge Avenue. And I want to thank you for the presentation. It was very good, and thank the commission for requesting this review of the comprehensive plan. I didn't hear you say that we should recommend a new plan. I heard the recommendation was the update. And I think that maybe there's confusion in that terminology because the 2006 plan wasn't really a new plan. They reviewed the 1990 plan and the Hanley Industrial Study Plan and the East-West Gateway Strassner Plan, and then brought those pieces forward, and we came up with this 2006 plan. I'm sure after we update this plan, we'll refer to it in the year that we accept it, as opposed to keep saying it 2006 revised plan. I think that's typically what happens, so maybe that's some of the confusion with new versus update. And the 2006 plan actually suggested an update at 5 years. My understanding, when I referred to full-blown, and I had this conversation with Mr. Dimmitt, a larger update is the amount of outreach that you do, community support. And I know we had the one public residential meeting, and it was only put in the news bulletin that came out during the holidays. And there was like 13 of us there, and 5 of us were aldermen or a P&Z. So there wasn't a whole lot of outreach, so I kind of wished like maybe a postcard or something so that we could get more input, because like Sherry, I think that's exactly when you get to those corridors, that's where the rub comes in with the residents. And so it would be nice if we could be more specific in the plans, or, you know, kind of what the public wants, and that can be in the sub-area plan, but bring the residents in on board with the plan. I think that would help. I hope that we actually work the plan. I was a little disappointed we didn't do the update in 5 years, because I got on the board in 2012 and requested the update 12-13, and we finally did the review the 14th. But what happened was we were faced with the rec center, and there was no thought as to that community center was, town center was addressed in the 2006 plan. But then when it came to deal with what are we going to do with this building, and what are we going to do with that building, and is this corner going to be the significant town center, there was no direction. And the reason I worry is that if we don't really work these plans, then land can get sold off, or something can be done that doesn't really fit in with the plan. So for instance, you know, I think 2006, we sold the land that the city owned to TGI Fridays, and then later to, it's now a bank, Fifth Third Bank. But those are the things that I just want to make sure that we work the plan so that they don't happen in the future. When you were asking about an update, do you see more input from the community, or did you think this was adequate input from the community? You can come to the microphone, yes.
I don't need it, but yeah. The amount of outreach, I think, reflects that this is just a study. So again, we defer, but yeah, I would think you would want a lot more and more robust outreach. And to your comment, and fits with somebody else's comment, is maybe you still have sort of a citywide meeting kind of like we had, but a lot of times what we do is then we'll have a neighborhood meeting if we're talking about a creek or a park or something key to that residential area, and we target that. Or we'll have a Manchester workshop or a Brentwood workshop, and you target issues specific to that, because you don't have to talk about everything in 60 to 90 minutes, so it yields more specificity. And actually it helps turnout, because people think about the city in specific places, the neighborhood around the school or this business district. And so yeah, that's a practice we use, and we would discuss that as part of the scope of work.
I know I talked to you after that public forum, and I know you said you even like in New City that you give packets where people can have coffees in their homes, and then you can develop what they want. So I think that's really good, and I do like the idea of the sub-plans and being specific to those particular areas. And it would be nice, like, to how are we gonna attack the various, I mean, are we gonna focus on Brentwood? I know the market then comes in and kind of dictates a little, and that's why the review in the 5 years. But if we could address it and, really work this. But the one other thing is the zoning map. Now, these changes are not part of the comprehensive plan. These are just what you're recommending versus your review, right? But,
I think that's existing.
Yeah, it's existing.
Yeah, I think this is we didn't even reproduce it actually, because we didn't want confusion that it was a map we created. So that's your existing zoning map, and rewriting or rezoning or updating anything to do with your zoning code would not be a part of the comprehensive plan. But a lot of times the decisions you make as part of the planning process yield and lend themselves to updating your zoning code. And that's what we discussed, is some towns have decided for economies of scale or swiftness to do it all in one project. It might be a 2-3 year long process. Other times towns will finish the plan and then kind of see how the plan shapes up over a year or so, and then evaluate it going forward and maybe attack it in bites instead of one big project. So.
okay. I just didn't remember in 2006 that we had planned development over the whole corridor. I thought it was like regional or mixed neighborhood use, that we had that underneath. And then, because planned development's pretty broad, and wouldn't you first know what your goal for the area is? I know planned development's a good tool so that you can be more specific and attract what you want, but isn't there a general under that, like you're looking for neighborhood, or what was the one that they call neighborhood mixed use, or that kind of thing? Isn't there some kind of underlay, so you have some idea of what you're looking for on that plan development?
Well, yeah, Mr. Wise, you want to speak to that?
So I think what you're referring to is what we call the future land use map, which is a separate map that's in the existing
Okay.
comprehensive plan.
Okay,
So those are two separate maps, but yes, you're correct. So on that map, there's a neighborhood retail, a community retail, a regional retail, and we have those various land use designations that then are used
And
in
that
one, crafting the zoning regulations, and in two, when we have a conditional use permit or a request for rezoning, that they get reviewed in light of that as well.
okay, thank you. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Alderwoman.
Mark Wilson, 2214 Haddon Lane. Just a couple of questions, and it's just because I've discovered a lot of this in the last couple months. And one of them is, I noticed web-based engagement as far as our residents. And one of the things that I've discovered is a lot of our residents don't readily access our website. So I'm wondering, and I'll give you a couple of questions and then let you speak, but I'm wondering if you've had different practices in different areas that might yield a little bit better feedback from our residential base. Then also, along the same lines, you talked about for businesses. I know how tough it can be to get businesses out. A lot of times they're running their businesses and trying to get national chains to take care of things. It's tough to get them to engage. However, there are alternative means by which to reach out to them. And then last, I think you touched upon this, but I think it's something that's really something to think about. What we found by talking to a lot of our residents over the course of the past couple of months is that there's hot button issues for each of them. And I'm sure you recognize that when you had the community groups come aboard. But as much as we'd like to think that Ward 1, Ward 2, Ward 3, Ward 4 might have engagement in just one issue, oftentimes you'll find that no matter what ward you're from, Manchester Corridor might be a hot button. might be, you know, thoughtful business development in another situation, another might be streets and infrastructure. But is there a way that we could develop a way to reach out to people and say, okay, the topic of the day is going to be infrastructure for this meeting. The topic of the day for this meeting is going to be Manchester Corridor, and so on. So you might just yield, if everybody wants to attend all 4 or 5 meetings, whatever the case might be, so be it. But in the meanwhile, what you'll do is you get the people engaged that are concerned about those specific areas.
Well, that's a great comment. Yeah, you got your arms around that for sure. Yeah, there's some different strategies and techniques to improve outreach. The business community, like you said, it's difficult sometimes because they have lives and a business to run, particularly for smaller, mid-sized businesses. They just are busy. That's why we do the workshops for them in the mornings. That's what we found works best, is before they get their day started or they have kids or something else to get to. You get them early at 7 or 7:30 in the morning. But there's some targeted business strategies working through chambers or developments if you have tenants in a specific development, working through them. So those are some strategies that work. We find engaging residents on specific issues is really effective because, like I said, if you don't do this, you don't think about this every day. So, what's the future of St. Louis? What should we work on? It's just a little intangible, and some folks may be intimidated by that conversation, or just like, I don't know, I don't really have anything to contribute to that. But if we're talking about the future of the Manchester Road corridor. When you get more geographic or site specific, usually that'll help turn folks out, and you'll get really in-depth comments, and people have put a lot of thought into it. So like I mentioned, that's something we do a lot. And then mentioned University City. So since it got brought up, we're working in University City, and they're working with some citizen working groups, and that's exactly what they're doing, to your point, is they have a team on transportation, and they're just chewing up everything with transportation. And then they have a team that's on parks, and so on and so forth. So there's a number of these teams, and it's kind of like a grid, or so then it's cross-referenced with some of the other efforts that might be geographic. So then we're meeting with folks in this part of town, but they're discussing all the issues, where then they have these tactical issue-based teams. Yeah, sorry. And it goes to your, I don't know who brought that up, it goes to your resources, and we work through that with you guys, and we say, well, this is how this would turn out, or this may not be what you guys are looking for. University City was very clear. They put a high emphasis on, they wanted really intense, in-depth outreach, and they wanted to cut at things from a couple different points. And so we structured a process that's going to get at that, including these DIY do-it-yourself kits, where we've basically created everything in a box that you need to facilitate urban planning, community planning meeting. And so folks can pick those up from City Hall, and as she said, do it at their house, at their church, around a barbecue grill, wherever they want to do it. And then they turn those materials back in through the city planners. And then it all still ends up back with us. And so there's ways you can use that for folks to even contribute an author to parts of the plan, or a lot of times you get really great solutions. So there's a whole toolkit of ways to get people involved in the project. And we're comfortable with all those, and we've used those even here, just in St. Louis County. So.
Thank you.
You knew I'd get up, didn't you, Mr. Damon?
I did, Ms. Charbonneau.
Thank you. Louise Charbonneau, 8833 Madge. Mr. Awesome, is Toolkit Plan speak? I thought it was, thank you. Maureen, you know why I like you so well? Because you got up to speak to, well, how many people did you actually touch? Mr. Lewis's question was very good. Mr. Dimmitt's question was very good. And I think we all sound a little smarter since we all went to school. I think the city got their money's worth that time. With regard to attendance tonight, we have 6 private citizens, count us please, 7 politicians, 7 planning and zoning members, plus a chairman, 1 city administrator, 1 director of planning and development. Wow. When the city sent out a postcard to every house to get a response for the park master plan update, how many people came? Cindy, you brought your skaters. I think the chicken girl was there. You're not going to get people to come. You're going to have to make it awfully enticing, and I don't know how you're going to do that. However, Ms. Saunders, Ms. Manister, perhaps Mr. Kramer, have mass mailings, mass emails? You have conversations with your constituents? You pick a question of the month and put some emails out. Start through the alderman. I think that's an important thing. And they get responses. So that's a thought. But I certainly do agree that we need more input, and I certainly do agree that we do not need to throw this baby out with the bathwater. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to address the commission? Okay, seeing none, Mr. Wise, let's review the schedule for April and when the commission would take this matter up. What would be your inclination, to take this up at the regular meeting or the work session?
I think my initial inclination would be to do it at the regularly scheduled, the April, is it 8th meeting?
Take it up at the 8th, see how far we get?
I think we only have
Reserve it.
one other item for that agenda, so it would be fit in well with that agenda.
All right. That sound good, everybody? Mr. Obertino?
Just a quick comment to go with what was said. I think this needs to be at a regular board meeting and not in a back conference room, and try to, again, to get as many people up
Good point.
here and not do the typical subcommittee.
Good point. Taking into account what we're going to be doing is deliberating the results of this report and then the next step. Certainly, I think the comments tonight involving the audience and the citizens in the next step in the update process, which we're not at yet. And I think everybody on the commission agrees with that approach.
And what are we trying to recommend? We're not making a vote tonight, but when we do ultimately make a vote, what are we voting
Yeah.
on?
I think
Because I'm kind of confused about
I
that.
think the issue will be the scope of the update that we're going to be requesting funding from the Board of Aldermen for. Mr. Nuremberger?
And that was my question, is, kind of goes along with Maureen's comment, is, are we starting over the timeline or whatever? Like, is it gonna be a new plan, and then we update it in 5 and 10, 20 years? Or are we gonna start, is this just gonna be an update, and then we have to go again and do it in 5 years? And, because we're talking about investing a lot of money in this plan to do it, no matter what we go, I just want to make sure we're really clear on what our goal is when we decide to do this.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And it sounds as if our consultant does not believe that a full plan is necessary. The question is how limited we want this update to be, or how extensive we want it to be. And I think we can take that up at our April meetings. Ms. Bilderbeck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One other thing too is, just because we have a subcommittee meeting, doesn't mean that it has to be in the conference room. What we've done to enhance those discussions, we've used with site plan review a lot when there's been applicants that have generated great interest to the public. We've set up tables here where the planning commission sits around so everybody can sit in the audience and watch us and hear everything. So we don't have a situation where we're in the conference room and people can't get there, yet we can still have that type of interaction that necessitates, or that really helps facilitate these types of discussions amongst the planning commission members, so it serves both purposes, should we need that going
Yeah.
forward.
I think that's a good point. The other benefit of having it in regular session is obviously with Mr. McCarthy back there in the videotaping. But I think we could probably replicate that at a subcommittee meeting, but good point. Any other points tonight from commissioners? Okay, is there any new business on the agenda?
There is not.
Okay, aldermanic report, any aldermen or women wish to address the commission? City planners report, Mr. Wise?
One quick update, there was a proposal last month for no leash needed on Hanley Road. They have withdrawn that application due to some contractual differences of opinion between the property owner and the potential buyers. So
Did they withdraw the application before we incurred any costs with the sound engineer?
they did,
Anything further?
that's all.
Okay. Any other rationale?
Mr. Chairman.
Sure, Alderwoman. Sure.
The Hanley Industrial, the 290 lot, is coming before the board on April 6th. That's at the tentative agenda. And I saw the first meeting before it was voted to move to the board where Rob Golderman asked if, he's with DCM, I think, is that the one? And he asked if the lots were combined, and I think you had said, yes, they're combined. That's what I wanted to know about those lots, is there was a 290A and a 290B. And part of that lot, from the tax records, the city of Brentwood owns. So I'm wondering how that's coming forward to the board, since it's our property. And my understanding was he was saying about having those combined. So maybe I'm confused, and that's why I just am asking for clarification.
yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Wise?
I believe, and without looking at the map, I'm not 100% sure, but I would guess the 290A would be the police department. The question of what was brought, it's not? No. Okay.
It's a different, yeah, it's a whole different,
Okay. The question that was brought up to the commission was the parking lot that Fontbonne has the lease on, and whether that was technically part of the lot for 290, or whether that was a separate lot.
It's 290.
Well, let's,
Anyway, if it could just be
sure.
investigated before April
Sure.
6th, because it's a 290, there's Unit A and B, and like I said, Southside Roofing sold it to DCM, or Don Music, one of the two, and then DCM transferred it to the city of Brentwood. And so as of 2015, it's $382,000 about with the city of Brentwood. So they were talking about, I think, the lot in its entirety, 290, not designated Unit A or B. And that's, I think, what he was asking at that time.
okay. Mr. Wise, can you get the Alderwoman an answer on that?
Yes.
Thank you. Any other business? Chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we stand adjourned.